In today's video, we're going to cover how to make soulful beats. I'm going to show you tips on sampling, layering, drum pattern ideas, and a lot more. So let's get into it. Now, to make soulful beats that actually sound good, the sample that you choose is really important. This can be the difference between a good beat and a bad one. So let's go over some things that you should look for. But before we do, if you could do me a huge favor and hit like or subscribe, it really does help my channel out and I would be forever grateful. Thank you. So I'm going to start by simply going into YouTube and searching up Kanye type samples or soul samples. YouTube is always a great place to find your samples. And this sample here is great for a few different reasons. One reason why is because vocals are a common staple in soulful beats, which this sample has. But there's another reason this sample's so good. If you listen closely, you'll notice that the instrumentation behind the vocals repeats the same pattern. So for example, you can hear this chop here. And this one here. They have the same musical patterns playing for the most part, but one part of the sample has vocals while the other one doesn't. And this can help me come up with arrangement ideas really easily. I can create one loop with the vocals and use that for the hook, and the other section without the vocals, I can use that for the verse, for example. So let's start with the beat. First thing I'm going to do is pitch the sample up, which again is another common practice for soulful beats. And now let's create a loop using these chops. I'll start by using the section of the sample that has vocals in it first. So that's the first two bars, which actually sounded pretty good. But for the second two bars, I created something that actually kind of sounds bad, as you can hear. Yeah, so this part of the loop is sounding pretty awkward right now. Part of what's causing this problem is the bass guitar in the low end. With the way I've placed those chops here, that bass guitar is just playing in really awkward moments. For the first two bars, that guitar is only playing at the very beginning. But for our last two bars, that guitar is playing all over the place. And it just sounds awkward. I know when I first started making beats, I would try to get every single chop to be absolutely perfect on its own, and this really restricted me from making some great beats because I realized that often it doesn't actually really matter. So here I'm going to EQ these frequencies out since I plan on adding my own bass in anyways. So by the end, once we add in our bass and our drums and all the other instruments, you'll hopefully hear that we won't even notice all this awkwardness with that guitar and these chops. So next, let's bring a bass into this beat. Here I'm going to use a lighter bass guitar, one that sounds somewhat similar to what was already in the sample originally. And I'm going to build a pattern that's kind of similar to what the sample was doing, where we have a lot of notes in the very beginning of every two bars, and then it just simplifies. And I'll do this every two bars as well. And now for my drums, my thinking is that I want a more dense drum loop. So I'll preview what sounds good while I listen to my loop. This drum loop here doesn't really fit what I'm looking for. But this does, since it's a drum loop that has far more notes playing. By using a more dense drum loop, the beat will start to sound much more full since the drums will be filling up more space in the beat. So here is a pattern that I've come up with. Now there's a few things that I want to point out that are really important about this drum pattern. For one, notice what I did in the very last bar. I've added a lot more snares and made the drum pattern much more dense in this part of the loop. The reason why I did this is because it will help mask that awkwardness from my sample chops. And we can even do a before and after for how our loop originally sounded. Again, that fourth bar sounds very awkward and pretty bad, but once we EQ that bass out and add in our own bass, as well as create a busy drum pattern for that particular section, it sounds pretty good. This is what I meant about not worrying too much about making your sample sound absolutely perfect, especially if you plan on adding much more layers of your own on top. Speaking of layering, one more thing that I did with these drums is I layered my own drums underneath. You can hear without this kick layer, the original kick sounds especially weak, so it needed some more help. Now here's a hot little productivity tip for you. An easy way to layer underneath your drum pattern is to listen for which chops are the ones you're looking for. In this example, I'm looking for kicks, so every single time I hear one, I'm going to select this by holding down Shift and Control and pressing down on the key. Then when you paste these notes into the sound that you want to layer, like my kick here, just click Alt and K. Then narrow down this window to a single note, and there you go. This makes layering much faster and much easier. Next, I'm also going to layer this subbier bass underneath the one that we already have just to fill up a little bit more of that low end. But as you can see, I'm only having it play on the longer, more sustained notes. Now I do feel as though this beat needs a couple more layers. So let's grab this very thin plucked guitar. It's not a huge sound by any means. And we'll also bring in this light string as well. So with everything together, here is what we have so far. So this is the loop that we'll use for the hook area. Now for the verse section, I'll delete the sample and a few more layers and start building something else by using some other parts of the sample that don't have those vocals. Now here I could have chopped out that vocal that happens at the end of the loop, but I sort of like the way it sounded, so I kept it. Next, I can still use a lot of the same layers that I've already built, like the bass and the guitar and the drums. So let's hear how this beat sounds once I include those sounds. This does sound good, but I do think there's room to fill up the beat a little bit more. You can hear with these new chops, we have this new instrument that plays at the beginning of each bar. We have this really bright piano playing in the sample, so let's work off this idea and bring in our own piano and create a pattern. So I'll try to find a pattern similar to the one that's already in the sample. Now it's not going to be 100% spot on, but it's close enough to sound good, I think. And I'll build a pattern that works well with the guitar and the bass patterns that I've already built. I know building these types of patterns can be really hard to do, so if you want my help with your beats, I want to take a second to let you know about my online beatmaking program, Better Beatmaker. It's a program that helps non-musicians become beatmakers. One member of mine mentioned that after 15 years of making music, he felt this program is the best musical educational tool that he's ever come across. And I've had tons of members say they've tried many of the other courses, but Better Beatmaker has just been better than the rest. So if you want to learn what your beats are missing and what you might be doing wrong, my members will tell you that Better Beatmaker comes highly recommended. A link is in the description box below if you're interested. Moving on, I think there's one extra tiny layer that can help fill this beat up even more. So let's grab a harpsichord, which is an instrument that shows up in many of my favorite soulful beats by Kanye. And I'll layer this alongside my bass. It's just a small layer to help thicken up that sound. So let's hear how this new verse section sounds with all our new layers in now. Cool, now let's start piecing things together. I'll start my beat by playing the hook section for the first 8 bars, and then I'll transition into my verse section. You'll notice for this transition, I extended that string pattern, so instead of stopping right at the end of the hook, it continues to play for a little bit longer. And I did the exact same thing with the vocals from the sample. You can see I created an extra little chop and I included it right at the beginning of the verse section. You can also see I dropped the drums and the bass from the very beginning of the verse. All of this just helps blur the lines so the arrangement isn't as predictable. Having everything from one section end all at once and beginning a new section all at once as well just becomes a little bit boring. And for the sake of variation throughout the verse section, I'm going to use some more vocal chops and place them at different times throughout the verse. And now I can just go back and forth between the verse and the hook, and we have ourselves a full soulful beat. By the way, I do have a full video breaking down the beats that Kanye made for College Dropout, which is full of soulful beats, so that should be showing up next to me. Hopefully you liked this beat and this video. Hit like and subscribe if you did. And yeah, click the video, watch it, and I will see you guys next week.